They were certain they had you. No doubt clouded their minds as they constructed what they believed was the perfect snare. Victory speeches were already rehearsed in their heads, your downfall already visualized in vivid detail. But confidence built on deception is inherently fragile, and the moment you refuse to play the part they assigned you, their entire plan shattered. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the stunned quiet of people realizing their target saw through everything. That silence carried the weight of their disbelief, their fury, their desperate scrambling to understand how their carefully controlled narrative had collapsed. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. You can sense the heaviness of their failed scheme, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Everything feels quieter, but not from calmness. It's the quiet of enemies hiding in shadows, whispering anxiously, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. They constructed the stage with meticulous care. They positioned the spotlight exactly where they wanted it, confident you would walk into it blindly. Instead, you turned that same spotlight directly on them. Their masks cracked. Their rehearsed kindness fell apart at the seams. Their stories began contradicting themselves under even basic scrutiny. What they considered flawless became transparently sloppy the moment you truly looked at it. You didn't merely dodge their trap. You exposed it completely. And that's what ignites their rage. Not that you escaped, but that you saw through the illusion from the beginning. You didn't require mountains of evidence or documented proof. You read the energy shifts. You noticed the subtle changes in tone. You caught the too perfect coincidences. You spotted the fingerprints they thought they'd carefully wiped away. Do you understand how terrifying that is to someone whose power depends entirely on deception? To be seen before they even make their move? That level of perception eats them alive from the inside. Their plan didn't just fail privately, it collapsed in full view. They anticipated watching you panic, break down, lose control. Instead, you gave them stillness. You offered them clarity, the one response they never prepared for. That moment when you looked at them without fear or doubt, but with quiet recognition that said, "I know exactly what you're doing," that look shook their foundation. It stripped away the power from their performance and left them exposed under the very spotlight they built for your humiliation. This is why fury consumes them now. The trap wasn't merely ineffective, it backfired spectacularly. The energy they invested trying to bring you down has reversed course. They're the ones drowning in confusion, frustration, and anger, endlessly replaying how everything fell apart. They thought they could predict your reactions and control your responses. But people like you don't follow scripts written by enemies. You don't walk into decorated cages just because someone hung flowers on the bars. You don't drink from cups just because they sparkle in the light. You noticed the inconsistencies in their story and trusted the inner stillness that whispered, "Something's wrong here." That stillness saved you. That's why the universe consistently positions you one step ahead. Not because you're paranoid or overthinking, but because you've learned to trust what others dismiss. The slight shift in tone, the meaningful pause, the change in someone's energy when they're concealing something. These are skills born from survival and sharpened through painful experience. That's precisely why their traps appear obvious to you while remaining invisible to everyone else. Never confuse quiet observation with ignorance. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one you never see approaching. They genuinely believed they had decoded you. They witnessed your stillness, your patience, your capacity to let things slide. And in their arrogance, they convinced themselves you were naive. To them, you appeared as soft clay, easy to mold, manipulate, and break. They interpreted your empathy as weakness, your kindness as blindness, and your silence as stupidity. But silence doesn't signify absence. It means you were storing every detail, every slip of the tongue, every forced smile, every crack in their carefully maintained mask. You weren't lost in the background, you were documenting the entire performance with forensic precision. People like this survive by convincing others they're smarter, sharper, more in control. When they saw you standing quietly, they thought perfect, easy target. But that's where their calculations failed catastrophically. You were collecting evidence in the shadows while they danced in the spotlight. You observed how their actions never aligned with their words, how their energy shifted whenever truth got too close, how their compliments always carried an aftertaste of control. And here's what stings them most. You let them believe they were winning. You didn't rush to expose them. You didn't waste breath arguing. You didn't give them the satisfaction of watching you crack. Instead, you gave them rope, and like every fool blinded by arrogance, they used it to tie their own noose. Your restraint wasn't stupidity. It was strategy. You understood something they never could. Exposing a liar too early only gives them time to twist the narrative, to deny, to make you appear unstable. So you waited. You allowed them to pile up contradictions. You let them dig so deep that when you finally spoke, there was no climbing out. Think about it. They expected panic, pleading, playing into their script. Instead, you sat back with the kind of calm that frightens people more than rage ever could. Your calm was a weapon. Your stillness was strategy. Your silence was thunder before the storm. When you finally moved, it wasn't messy. It was precise, surgical, undeniable. One word from you exposed the entire architecture of their scheme. That's why they're not just embarrassed. They're terrified. Because if you caught this, what else did you see? What else are you holding that hasn't been revealed yet? Have you noticed how the angriest people in your story right now are the ones who thought they had you in their pocket? The ones who swore you were gullible. The ones who smirked behind your back. Their rage burns hotter than anyone else's, because they weren't just exposed. They were exposed by the very person they underestimated the most. That humiliation cuts deeper than any direct attack. It's one thing to lose to someone you respect, but to lose to the person you laughed at, the one you called dumb, the one you thought you could manipulate. That humiliation eats them alive. You were never their prey. You were the hunter who let the game reveal itself. While they were throwing crumbs to lure you in, you were tracking their footprints in the dirt. While they were staging fake smiles, you were noticing the twitch in their jaw, the tremor in their voice, the way their stories changed depending on who was listening. They were performing, you were decoding, and in the end, who really held the power? The truth is, people like this don't fear being disliked. They fear being seen, and you saw them completely. That's why their fury is so loud now. They can't erase what you witnessed. They can't rewrite the timeline you already lived. And they can't shake the image of your calm expression when you let them know without saying much at all. I knew everything. That look alone was enough to shatter their illusion. The softness they mocked is the same quality that destroyed them. Your ability to listen, to care, to pick up what others miss, that's what made you dangerous. They thought sensitivity made you fragile, but in reality, it made you unshakable because you weren't reacting from impulse. You were responding from knowledge. You weren't flailing in confusion. You were waiting for the right moment to strike. And when you did, it was already too late for them. The greatest punishment for a deceiver isn't being stopped early. It's being allowed to complete the masterpiece of their own downfall. They thought you were passive, too slow to comprehend. Every time they moved a piece into position, they exchanged smug smiles, as if you were blindly walking into their snare. What they failed to realize was that you weren't stumbling forward. You were watching step by step, letting them reveal every hidden card, every trick, every intention. You didn't interrupt their performance. You gave them the stage, and in doing so, you gave them enough rope to hang themselves with their own script. Exposure requires completion. A half-built lie can still be hidden, adjusted, or denied. But a finished trap reveals its maker with perfect clarity. You let them complete the setup so that when truth surfaced, there would be no escape, no denial, no, "you're just overreacting." You allowed their arrogance to become the nails in their own coffin. Had you confronted them early, they would have laughed it off, played dumb, flipped the script, painted you as dramatic or paranoid. But you didn't give them that opportunity. You held your tongue. You gave them rope. And when their mask finally slid off, there was no way to glue it back on. Patience is not weakness, it's strategy. Silence is not ignorance, it's evidence gathering. While they were plotting, you were documenting. While they staged generosity, you noted how their body language never matched their words. While they faked concern, you noticed the delay in their eyes, the stiffness in their smiles, the way their interest in your life appeared suddenly like a performance written on cue cards. They thought you were nodding along, buying the act, but you were the audience member who had already read the script. And here's the question they're asking themselves now. If they saw through this, what else did they see? That's the paranoia chewing them alive, because they know this wasn't the first scheme. They know this wasn't the first time they staged something against you. But this time, they were caught red-handed. And once someone proves they can see behind the curtain, the illusion is broken forever. Imagine a spider spinning its web with perfect precision, believing the fly is already trapped. But when the light hits, the spider realizes it's the one tangled in its own threads. That's the scene they're stuck in. They thought the web was for you. They didn't realize they were the one standing in the center, exposed, unable to move, without tearing apart the very trap they built. That's the beauty of your strategy. You didn't resist. You didn't thrash. You simply let them keep weaving until their own pride made escape impossible. And now, with the spotlight shining, the whole stage reveals not your fall, but their design. The same arrogance they used to mock you is the very thing that destroyed them. They believed patience meant weakness. They believed empathy meant blindness. They believed silence meant stupidity. But you weaponized all three. You let them think they were in control. And that false confidence pushed them into overexposure. They overplayed their hand. They showed their tells. And when the curtain dropped, they were the only ones left standing guilty under the light. Now they can't explain it away. It's too obvious, too detailed, too well documented. Their hands are dirty, and there's no washing them clean. And here's what makes their rage burn even hotter. You didn't respond with the chaos they expected. You didn't beg for clarity. You didn't fight to stay in their narrative. You walked out with composure, clarity, and that terrifying smile that said, "I saw everything, and I don't even need revenge." The cruelest mistake your enemies made was fighting yesterday's version of you, not realizing that person no longer exists. The trap wasn't random. It was custom designed using memories of who you used to be. They built it for the person who once tolerated disrespect in the name of peace, who swallowed pain to avoid conflict, who ignored red flags because starting over felt impossible. But here's the truth that destroys them. They designed their scheme for a version of you that has evolved beyond recognition. They studied your history, not your growth. They thought they knew your weaknesses, but they were working from outdated information. While they were building a cage for the old you had already transformed into someone untouchable. The same pain they once inflicted became the training ground that sharpened your perception and fortified your spirit. That pain built boundaries they never saw coming. Imagine a thief trying to break into a house with keys you lost years ago. They slide the key into the lock, expecting the door to open, only to find the lock has been changed. That's exactly what happened here. They showed up with guilt trips, false promises, and fake loyalty wrapped in sweet words, expecting the door to swing open. But it stayed locked because you are not that person anymore. The emotional version of you, the overly forgiving, overly explaining, overly sacrificing version, has vanished. They were counting on the person who would accept blame just to fix things, who would beg to be understood. Instead, they encountered someone stronger, calmer, sharper, someone willing to walk away from what once felt impossible to leave. That's why their plan failed. They tailored it to a ghost. They rehearsed a script for a character who no longer walks this earth. When you showed up silent but unshakable, they realized they had nothing. Growth turned their perfect setup into a perfect failure. They hunted the shadow of who you were, but you arrived as the storm of who you've become. Now they stand in the ruins of their own arrogance, replaying every conversation, every fake smile, every staged act of kindness, wondering which part exposed them. They lie awake, furious, not just because you escaped their trap, but because you never fell for it in the first place. That's the wound that won't heal. That's the humiliation they can't shake. And deep down they know they'll never be able to fool you again. The worst defeat isn't when your enemy fights back. It's when they walk away, leaving you exposed in your own mess. That's why their fury burns so intensely, because you didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. You didn't crumble or cry in front of them. You didn't argue or prove your worth. You simply let the trap collapse under its own weight and walked away free. That is power, and it drives them insane. They stand there now with guilt they can't erase, evidence they can't delete, and a story they can't control. Your silence was louder than any confrontation. Your calm burned deeper than any scream. They set the perfect trap. They thought the story was already written. But you flipped the script. You let them play themselves. And now the world doesn't see you as the victim. They see them as the fraud. That's the victory they can never erase. They thought they were prepared because they had collected every version of you that ever bled. They archived your past reactions like weapons, convinced that memory was power, convinced that if they pressed the same wounds, the same responses would appear on command. To them, your history wasn't something you outgrew. It was a manual they planned to use against you. They wanted the version of you that fractured under pressure, the one who needed answers, the one who mistook attention for love and silence for abandonment. But while they were memorizing your old triggers, something fundamental changed. You studied yourself in ways they never bothered to. You healed where they expected scars to stay open. You upgraded internally while they clung to outdated access points. It was like watching someone attempt to break into a system using passwords that no longer exist. While they rehearsed your mistakes, you rewired your patterns. While they tried to bait you with old wounds, you learned how to stand alone without collapsing. They brought dysfunction back into the conversation expecting numbness, but this time numbness never came. What showed up instead was clarity. They expected tears and arguments, but what met them was stillness, not the stillness of defeat, but the kind that terrifies manipulators because it signals loss of control. You no longer needed their apology, their explanation, or their validation. You built a foundation they never saw because they weren't looking for strength, only weakness. They arrived swinging blades forged from your past, only to realize you were wearing armor made from every cut they left behind. Their strategy collapsed because they weaponized what they understood, and you won with what they ignored: your growth, your discernment, your peace. And peace in the hands of someone who has healed is devastating to anyone who survives by provoking chaos. What unsettled them even more was that you didn't just outmaneuver the people in front of you, you traced the pattern behind them. You stopped focusing on surface betrayal and followed the repetition, the timing, the eerily familiar scripts. Conversations felt rehearsed. People appeared at precise moments carrying recycled lines, the same tones, the same accusations dressed in different faces. It wasn't random, it was coordinated. While others would have drowned in emotion, you stayed observant. You realized many of them weren't even acting independently. The masterpiece they built to break you became the evidence that exposed them. They invested everything into your downfall, imagining your collapse, only to watch you stand unburned in the ashes, rising higher. You didn't defend yourself. Reality did it for you. The lies cracked. The story lost traction. And now they're forced to watch you thrive where they needed you buried. You weren't placed there to break. You were placed there to see, to witness, to record. You became the living receipt they can never erase. Your survival, your clarity, your refusal to collapse is the testimony that convicts them without accusation. So now you smile, not because you're unaware, but because you already know how this ends. That smile is the verdict. It says the setup failed, the script flipped, and the universe handled what you didn't need to. What was meant to bury you elevated you. What was meant to silence you revealed everything. You didn't just survive the storm, you outgrew the system that needed you small. Let us close in prayer. God, thank you for the strength you placed inside the one listening right now. Strength that endured betrayal without becoming bitter. Clarity that emerged without cruelty. Peace that held firm without fear. Guard their heart from resentment and their mind from confusion. Cover them as they walk forward unashamed, aligned, and steady. Let no weapon formed against them prosper, and let every hidden scheme collapse under the weight of truth. Restore what was taken, protect what remains, and elevate them where they once were targeted. Teach them when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to walk away without explanation. May their life be living evidence that healing is power and truth needs no defense. In Jesus' name, amen. If this message resonated, don't ignore it. Like the video, subscribe to Rise and Shine, and drop 77 in the comments if you know the plan against you has already failed. Stay grounded, stay clear, and remember, what was meant to destroy you became the proof of who you really are.